I just bought a NASA shirt.
All right, welcome to the Science Teachers Association of Ontario conference for 2018. We're going to be live streaming our first keynote presentation here momentarily.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Taryn Dodds. I'm the president of SAO 2018. And what a fantastic opportunity for you to join us for Science for All, Engaging Our Future. I want you to check out the mobile app for the wide variety of speakers, engaging sessions, and visit the SAO Playground, Power of Ideas exhibition and exhibits. We are confident that you will go back to your classrooms with a multitude of new ideas. On behalf of the executive and board, welcome to SAO 2018. Enjoy the conference. I'm going to pass it now to Nancy, who will introduce Dr. Sinclair.
Bonjour, bienvenue dans cette classe, je m'appelle Doro, nous connaissons donc Mr. Nico Jaway is now being queen now, teaching in them, Niigaan, Arkanamake, Kwewa, Arkanamake, Niniwa. Hi, my name is Nancy. I come from here. I come from Nucredit Reservation, and I'm happy to be here with Sheila and Jody. And I wanted to share a little bit. There was a little bit of confusion about some of the protocols this morning, and I wanted to share you a little bit of teaching on tobacco. Sometimes I ask for it to be presented publicly, but this morning I had an opportunity to sit with Sheila and discuss some of the protocols around tobacco. And what I wanted to share with you about that is when we do land acknowledgement, all of you have a land acknowledgement, right, in your school? Yeah, we're all starting these land acknowledgements. They're getting a little bit controversial, right? Some people are saying they're patronizing, they are the act of reconciliation and all of that. When we started doing land acknowledgements, I went to elders and I asked them about things. And I went to my mom. My mom comes from Wapato, Saskatchewan. And I went to my mom and I was explaining this to her and I said, what is the purpose of this? And she told me about the old way, how it used to be, and how and why we're passing tobacco when we enter into somebody's home. The tobacco is the knock on the door. The tobacco is it's how you ask permission to enter into somebody's home. And in those land acknowledgements, what's happened is we're retrying to create a relationship with the people of the territory. I'm a lucky lady in that I'm a person of this territory. And I have been asked by my community and leadership to go out and represent our community in this area. And you know this area is a busy area and it's full of people. And so those land acknowledgements are just to remind us and help us remember that we're utilizing somebody's land. And I think about that more. And when I think about those land acknowledgements, what I'm thinking about, it's a land acknowledgement. It's not a people acknowledgement. It's to acknowledge the place that we're using and occupying and conducting business in. And that when we do pass that tobacco, which I received from Sheila this morning, she's asking me to activate something. And so I'm kind of doing a twofold thing, a land acknowledgement and an opening. And in that land acknowledgement, We're learning how to knock on the door again. Because probably 5 or 10 years ago, nobody in this room even heard the Mississaugas of the New Credit. Now everybody knows. It's not about us being placed on the map. It's about us starting a relationship and starting to have a discussion over how the land is being cared for, not necessarily who owns the land. And we don't congregate, and that's part of what this conference is about, this special day that they've put aside for Indigenous knowledge, is how we don't congregate, how we're going to work together. Because the big picture is how we're going to work together to help the land. That's the vision that 13 elders told me, but I have to start going out and working and helping people, all people coming together to help the land. That should be our paramount, our goal, is how are we going to help the land. All week I've been out here in Toronto. I don't really like it out here. It's too busy. But I keep asking people, how are you caring for my lake? How's my lake doing? I have a grandson now. I want to take him to that lake. I want him to fish suckers out of that lake. I want him to harvest wild rice up the river, or the river. How's my lake doing? If my lake is not in good shape, we're not doing a good job. I'm not doing a good job. We're not doing a good job. And how we're going to care for what takes care of us. So I'm going to present a little bit on Sheila's behalf for everybody else in the way that we would open. Okay? And this is nothing. This tobacco passing and that is nothing. Right? I don't see no pipes here. I don't see the women here who's going to honor the water. We're starting to learn. Someday we're going to get there. So don't stress about how to approach me. Don't stress about which way you need to place that tobacco. That's my job as Anishinaabe to take care of that. I don't expect you to be Anishinaabe. I don't expect you to know how we do things. Just ask. Several wicked down anyway, Margaret and Duffy now in feet mouth. Made walk we in the game. Several wicked and Nabeo, I say. Nijamwe, I say. Nabeo Wisnia, Nijamwe Wisnia. Nabeo Mosewa, Nijamwe Mosewa. Several wicked now, Madosh Kore, Nigacho Gami Janga Kinakego. Several wicked now, Gokumas Mudwavia, Piton, Namada Ben. Piton, Chego, Arkanamaki, we Kanawia. Gokumas Nana, Gokumas Panapsagan, Ranchada, and Dochiban Monkey Echo. We don't call wish now. We don't call wish now. Deba went to Awen, meanwhile, now to watch Kawen. Don't be fooled, I'm not fluent in my language. I'm not. I wish I was. I wish I was, but I'm not. But I was given that short petition to ask the things, the seen, the unseen things. That's what I'm asking. I'm acknowledging everything: water, animals, trees, plants, everything that's sustaining our life today. Everything that we're going to take life from today to try to spill some life over here with. It looks more like knowledge that we're spilling over here. And that's a little short, tiny little petition, Thanksgiving, and asking those unseen things to come and sit with us, the grandmothers, to come and sit with us and help us to take things apart, help us to see through things so that we can grow our kendosman, our knowledge. And I'm supposed to introduce Niigaan, and I don't know him very well, but I know he's Anishinaabe. And I know he comes from Manitoba, and I know we need to get him an apartment over here because he's always here in Ontario. But I wanna introduce him. He has. I was a little nervous that I was gonna have to read his bio because I've never done that before. I've never read. Introduce somebody by reading about them, and he has his own bio that he's going to read. One of the things One of the things that when we go to somebody else's territory, if I went to Manitoba or Saskatchewan or somewhere, I don't know the protocols of those people. I will come with whatever it is that they would ask. I would want to sit with their grandmothers and their grandfathers, and I'm going to tobacco them. And I'm going to ask them and tell them, grandmother, I want to come in your home. I want to come in, I want to talk to your children. I want to teach your children something. And that grandmother, she has jurisdiction over her grandchildren. And if she tells me no, I have to accept that no. It's not a no in a Western way. It's a no in that she doesn't believe that is what is right for her grandchildren to be learning. If she says no, I know from Anishinaabe perspective that that's enough. I don't start negotiating with her. I don't start telling her, retelling her how great my teachings are going to be for her children. I don't go to Dakota Territory and set up a sweat lodge without discussing with the elders or community leaders about everything that I'm going to do there exactly. And I'm not going to do anything else outside of that. If the grandmother tells me no, it's no. This is the old practice, this land acknowledgement is entering into somebody else's home. You take them gifts, tobacco, whatever their protocol is, and you ask permission. You knock on the door, you ask permission. And if they say no, it's okay. It's not a Western way to say no. Don't take no for an answer. Isn't that how we were taught? Don't take no for an answer. We have to respect those grandmothers and their jurisdiction over their grandchildren. It's been a long time since we've humbled ourselves and asked permission to teach grandchildren. Does that make sense? You connect that up to your land acknowledgement about why we're doing the land acknowledgement. In this area, I don't recognize modern day treaties and land claims. The treaty that I recognize is the Dish with One Spoon. That's the original treaty. That's the first treaty that was made. It existed, pre-existing contact. And that treaty does not talk about the rights of people. That treaty talks about how we're going to treat the land, how we're going to conduct ourselves with the land. And after that treaty came a very popular treaty that everybody knows. The first treaty made with non-native people was the Turo. But I know in this area we get confused about who are the people of the territory. The people of the territory are Anishinaabe. Most of Ontario is Anishinaabe people, Anishinaabe territory. And that Dish with One Spoon, it held then and it still holds today. And then I met a lady who became a Canadian a week ago, and I talked to her about her responsibilities under the Dish with One Spoon. And I want to acknowledge that treaty as part of my opening / land acknowledgement. Okay. And so now, Niigaan.
I'm ready.
He's ready. Okay, I'm done.
Oh, so now I start? Okay, now I start. Okay.
All right. Is that mic off? Apparently, if the two mics get together, they explode. Is that true? Are they off? Okay, perfect. Okay, here we go. All right. How's everybody doing this morning? Good? Yeah. Like I was on a flight from Edmonton like 20 minutes ago. Or not quite 20 minutes ago. I got in at 2 a.m. and you can't get a rental car at 2 a.m. I found that out in Toronto. That's fun. Anyways, you're not far from the airport, so that's nice. But bonjour de mga kadok. Niigaan may panong gusto cost namin go siyang godem. Imin lang na mumayayan. Gana batch pangigis na agujing. Nudin agujing. Bonjour de Shomsak. Kumusak. Numiji Nibikwe. Misha and Nijik. It's a pleasure to be here to share a little bit of language with you. I want to acknowledge Nancy, who I don't know very well, but of course, a tremendous respect for her work and the work that she's going to be doing today with all of you, and as well as many of the others that are here to work with you. And of course, I want to acknowledge my relatives and Mississauga the New Credit, and only because I don't want to miss them out, but the Haudenosaunee are also in this neighborhood as well. So I want to acknowledge that they're, of course, our Wendat relatives as well. Having a lot of different relationships with this territory, I travel a lot. And so I travel a lot throughout different, I just came from Treaty 6 yesterday, I come from Treaty 1, and so I bring greetings from you from both my home and then also all of my relatives in my area. There's a whole bunch of things I want to get to, but I only have 45 minutes, so I'm going to try to move as quickly as possible. But yeah, this is the stuff that I do. You know, the stuff that I do is I carry many different sort of things, but the really thing that matters is I think of myself like a Shkabeus. A Shkabeus for us is a person who takes on the role and the responsibility and the ethic of helping. We don't go out there to, like a Shkabeus doesn't go out there and lead things because that's what's left up to our Ogamok or our knowledge carriers or our what we call our Chi Anishinaabe, which are those big thinkers. You know, I can think of myself as a Shkabeus, meaning need somebody to cut the wood. That's what I need. That's what needs to be done. That's what I do. If someone needs someone to set the earth to make the fire, that's what I'll do. I need someone to take the young men out and be a good uncle to them. That's what I'll do. So that's what I hope to provide for you today. I don't provide. I'm not going to come in and be tell you how to do your practice, because first off, I'm a recovering school teacher, so that means I'm in step 7. I'm in acknowledgement now, so it's fantastic. But I was a drama teacher, you know, you know, as a drama teacher, I always had this kind of illusion and vision and respect for the science teachers, because the science teachers were like a special, unique group. They huddled together in the staff room. They wore all the cool clothes. They all had PhDs anyways, or masters or areas of science. And one day, you know, I tried to be a scientist. I watched an episode of ER one time, and I said, I can do that. It looks cool. George Clooney can do it. I can do it. And it turns out you got to know science, and I wasn't very good at that. But I always had a great passion for it. And what I realized later in life is that I've always been a person who has been deeply engaged and embedded within the sciences, but perhaps the sciences not that was talked about in my high school classroom. I want to tell you a story. So in 1671, there was the Wemit-Tegojawak. The Wemit-Tegojawak are what we refer to in Anishinaabe as the French. It refers to the sails that they had, the big, huge white sails that they carried and they brought into our territories. Now, the Wemit-Tegojawak had a great interest and a great affinity with the Anishinaabe. Unlike the Jaganashtak, the Redcoats, who had a very combative relationship with us and generally did not get along with us, really until the Treaty of Niagara of 1764, the Wemit-Tegojawak made great inroads into our territories, and we adopted them. We adopted the Wemit-Tegojawak as our family. And in fact, many of the Wemit-Tegojawak amongst themselves, the French amongst themselves, would complain upon the return of traders to the forts to say, the French are losing their Frenchness. And what they were concerned about, really, was they were being Anishinaabified. Meaning, we gave them names, we adopted them, we married them into our families, not because we thought they were somehow better, or we thought, what an incredible opportunity for a monopoly. We had this guy coming in, he's only going to sell to us. If he marries in, let's marry him in. And for the Wemit-Tegojawak, they made great inroads into our relationships, into our families. And the Wemit-Tegojawak had a meeting represented by a man called La Poterie in 1671 at one of our great stopping places in the Anishinaabe in Boating, or what's now known as Sault Ste. Marie. Now, Boating is a seminal place for Anishinaabe, for us, because it is one of our central locations in our great migration journey. And we come originally from the New York area, but have our great nation stretching from all the way from the coast of the Great Water to all the way into now Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Great Lakes. But upon that path, Boating was one of our centers. And La Poterie, with the other Women-to-Beaujois, arrived, and St. Lucian, who was the representative of the king, La Poterie being the recorder of this meeting, recorded this meeting in 1671. And what the French offered to us at this time was a chance to be the French king's children. I think to yourself, oh, I'm not sure how I think about that. But that's how the French saw it. They saw Anishinaabeg as becoming under the control of the king. How the Anishinaabeg saw it is a chance for a new relative, much like how we adopted and brought the Women-to-Beaujois into our families. Now we would have this exclusive partnership if we only created treaty with them. And so the offering of treaty from the French king, understanding for us to be the children, and the understanding for us to make them a part of our family, there were many overlaps to that decision. And whether it was fully understood or not was embodied within the treaty-making process. Now, the offering of the king was that we would do this in such a way that we would put it on a piece of paper, which for us was somewhat foreign. However, we had writing evidenced by the signatures used by the Anishinaabe Ogimak, who came up each one at a time to sign the paper upon being presented with treaty. And each Anishinaabe came up to sign that treaty. And what they did, recorded by that gathering, by La Poterie, the governor's delegate then attached to the stake an iron plate on which the arms of the king were painted, and he drew up an official report of the transaction, which he made all the people sign by their chiefs, who with their signatures depicted the insignia of their families. Some of them drew a beaver, others an otter, a sturgeon, a deer, or an elk. I apologize, the screen's half cut on my screen, so I'm missing the other last part of the sentence, why I kept messing up there. Now, a couple things happened at this meeting. I don't have time to tell you about all of it, but it's such an interesting meeting. One of the things happened was the French tried adding an extra piece of paper after all the signatures were present, and the Ogimak, one of the representatives, the Shkabeos of the Ogimak, came up, withdrew that piece of paper that had been added after all the signatures had been added, and threw it in the fire. You know what that's called? That's called editing. But that's also a refusal to allow for those who you've become partners with to immediately renege on the partnership, or to add to the partnership, or to outright lie, to say, oh, we're going to add these things you didn't know about before. So that's an important thing. But probably the more important thing out of all of this is evidenced that Anishinaabe absolutely, unequivocally, and undeniably understood writing. We had written text because absolutely nobody told us how to write, nobody told us what to write, and nobody told us how to write. We did this on our own volition. And there is absolute, undeniable proof in 1671, recorded by French hands, that we had literacy, meaning we understood the power of signs, or what we refer to now as semiotics, meaning attached to symbols, meaning metaphor, and whether they be squiggly lines in these bound books, or whether they be written on things like skin or hair, or on things like hide or beadwork, we had literacy, period. And what does literacy come with? Well, government, civilization, law, all of those things come with the written text. Lastly, what was it that we used to sign? Well, we used animal insignias. And you think, okay, well, according to this, it's pretty evident that St. Lucian, through La Poterie, understood that somehow animal insignias meant something. And then you go and you zoom ahead 30 years, and you go to the Great Peace of Montreal, whereas 300 Indigenous Ogimak chiefs, leaders, not just from Anishinaabe, but also from our Haudenosaunee relatives, from our Wendat relatives, all met in Montreal. Now, the time period, Canada is in a huge flux in this period because there is a 100-year conflict, for the most part, between the Anishinaabe and the Three Fires Confederacy with the Wendat, also known as the Huron, and the Haudenosaunee, the Six Nations. Now, at that time, 5 nations. So this huge conflict is a bloody, awful battle, but peace is forged in 1701 with the Wemitabojawak at Montreal. Now, that's remarkable. But in this treaty, what is committed to is a sense of relationship, of friendship, and more importantly, of family. Because you can see on this treaty signatures from Indigenous nations all throughout the eastern part of what we now refer to as Canada. But what we also evidenced within these signatures is the evidence that there is not only literacy, there's intellectualism, there's civilization, there's governments. And I wish I had time to go through all the signatures, but these three signatures right here, I don't know if you want me to do this, right there, those three right there. If you're over there, it's those three at the top there. Those three are from Boating. And you say, oh, there is an intellectual tradition there of animal signatures at that time. Now, as we now know, or as you now know, perhaps as being more exposed to these things, they are our dodems, our clans. They are our relatives, in which I acknowledged at the opening today, and Nancy acknowledged as being a Makwa dodem as we started off today. These are the animals who travel with us, who we have been named by and identified as family by, and therefore we take care of, and more importantly, they take care of us. And that is the relationship that we share with the world around us. It goes back to our creation story. When we were set down in Anishinaabe, it was the animals, the birds, the fish who agreed to take care of us forever. And in reciprocity, we took their names, just like you do with family when they adopt you. And that is why we have clans. This is what you're seeing is a creation story in action. But as we now know, Anishinaabe didn't just stop learning at the creation story. We study every single day. Our entire life is spent with our relatives who constantly teach us how to live in this world. And you might be asking yourself, why would 3 Anishinaabe from Boating travel to the Great Peace of Montreal and forge a treaty and then sign using deer? Like, why? I'm going to tell you why. Now, in this short video, you're going to see a mother and a baby doe, and I don't care if this is 2018 or 1492, I don't care. The notion of obstacles and mentorship and a mother teaching a child or a young one how to get across an obstacle. I want you to figure out and watch how this baby overcomes an obstacle. Because the mother says, well, try this.
Baby can't do that.
Now, ignore the commentary from whoever that is. Just ignore just watch what the baby does. And remember, Anishinaabe watched this for millennia, thousands and thousands of years. Now, what's the challenge? The baby can't jump over the fence. So what does the mother do? Not abandon, because you don't give up on your young ones when they're beginning to learn. No. Please ignore the commentary. But we're all feeling what they're saying. The thing I love the best about this video is how the mother never gives up and refuses to do it for the baby. This video is proof that if you teach, if you mentor, if you are kind and responsible and ethical, that young people can figure out their own solutions. The reason why Anishinaabe used the Dodamak is not just because it refers to our creation story, but that is probably one of the most important things. It is that the deer teaches the notion of patience, kindness, and never giving up. Never giving up on each other, even when you are struggling at the most brutal of times. And war creates the most brutal of circumstances. There's probably nobody that you should look more to than the deer to understand how to make peace and how much patience is needed, how much kindness is needed, and yes, how much ecology, the world, the natural world, can teach us, and how Anishinaabeg, we are not the storytellers reported to you in bookstores. We are scientists. We are scientists that have a plethora, a vibrancy, and a thoroughness of the world around us in intellectual traditions written within our writing themselves. As Hadi Bolker says, that we have been writing as Anishinaabeg for millennia, since the very beginning of time, and we have made science our priority as a people. In Manitoba, our first treaty is this. Sorry, I gave it away there. But it is the offering between Lord Selkirk and Peguis of a relationship. Because treaties are never about friends, they are about family. That's what they are. And that's why treaties are so seminal to understand in the areas in which you live, the dish with one spoon being probably the best example of this, but also the Gashwenta, the two row that Nancy spoke about. It is the commitment to each other to never give up that relationship, but to also understand that there are protocols and parameters to that relationship. The two row meaning we will have two separate bedrooms, but we might be roommates, or we have two separate canoes, but we will share the water together. The dish with one spoon being that we will share the commitment to each other to share from the land and share equally, to share in a respectful way, and more importantly, a sustainable way. But in Manitoba, this is the Selkirk Treaty, the Peguis-Selkirk Treaty of 1817. I want you to notice a couple things. One is that it's very much about the land. Literally, the land is drawn on this map with the Anishinaabeg hands, with British Jaganashok hands. Of course, at this point, the British had moved into Manitoba, the Jaganashok, the 7 Years' War. Here is what Peguis has offered to Lord Selkirk. Peguis has offered to Lord Selkirk to live along the Red River. I'll see all these dots here. You might hear treaties mentioned as things like land sales. They're not land sales. Not one treaty has ever been a land sale, even if they may be framed in that way, even by the courts. They are sharing mechanisms. Like, I want you just to look at this treaty, and I want you to imagine that Peguis would say to Selkirk, you know what, Selkirk, you keep all the water. I never really want to wash again. I don't really want to drink water again. Like, that's probably the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. Treaties are not about land sales. They're about relationship-making vessels, meaning that we share the land, and more importantly, like, take a look here. What is the land that Peguis has offered to Selkirk? What an incredible, like, when a relative comes and stays with you, do you make them sleep in the garage? No. Like, well, it depends on what relative, right? Do you make them eat moldy food? No. Do you make them sleep on dirty sheets? No. You give them the best opportunity to live. That's what you do. You're the kindest to them. You ensure their success. Why? Because you respect them so much. And all that Peguis asked in return is that every single year you return back and you offer Seema, 100 pounds of it. Now, you're going to find out what 100 pounds really means as I talk about a Seema in just a minute, but it is the same offering that you witnessed today, and also the same thing Nancy spoke about, which is the offering of tobacco is that exact beginning of a relationship. And that's why I love when, Nancy, you were talking there. I had this image, which I started off this morning. We didn't plan that at all, but there you go. It is about the opening of a relationship. But Peguis also offered something else. Notice how he again, the intellectual tradition of offering our Dotamok. Yet again, we see it evidenced on a treaty. What Peguis was saying to Selkirk was, not only are you in the place we're going to ensure your success, but look at who you are sharing the land with. Those who have adopted us have now, via us, adopted you. And you, as much as you are a part of a relationship with us as Indigenous people, Anishinaabeg, you also are now relatives with the bears, the martens, the fish, the snakes, the lizards, and that is called making a family. What we were saying to Selkirk at that time, and we continue to say now, is the ecology around us, which we have been studying for millennia. The water, it's not just the animals, it's also where they live. The animals, the rocks, the trees, the earth. It is these places that can teach us the most about how to live in this space. So it matters that we watch the loons and we understand the power of their eyes. And that if we see the power of their eyes, we go, oh, that can teach us a lot about seeing clearly in the darkest of spaces. Or we look at the bears and we see the ways in which their ecology, their bodies can recycle urine, which almost no other being in the world can do that. And as we studied the bears, we understood that bears have a sacred ecology that have medicines within their system that can teach us all about how to take care of ourselves, how to promote good health. And they also have this ability to take care of territory. Like, does anyone ever see bears mark a tree? Ever seen a bear mark a tree? Well, bears mark trees for two reasons. One is they say, I live here, and if you're going to live here, you should probably acknowledge that I'm present. There's nothing more territorial acknowledgement than that. Bears are the first territorial acknowledgement, which is why you had a bear clan person speak about territorial acknowledgement this morning. Second is, why do bears mark trees? It's like bear Tinder. That's a terrible reference, I know. It's like saying, I'm here, I'm looking to hang out, maybe make a baby or two, but if you're gonna come see me, this is what I'm all about. This is how strong I am. This is the secretions, which shows you my age and my strength. And more importantly, this is how close I am. Come have a date. Bears calling cards on trees is the first semiotic. It is writing itself. And what it should tell you is that written intellectual traditions are not human-centric. Bears, too, have literacy. Now, as we begin to think of science, I'm here to challenge, to offer, to hope that our relatives in the science worlds, which I am only peripherally a part in and when I say that, I mean sort of the mainstream science worlds, to offer to you a notion that Indigenous peoples are not only peoples who have these incredible arts and offerings and politics and laws and governments, but we have scientific knowledge that can benefit your classroom. And this afternoon at 1 o'clock, I'm going to offer you some ideas on how to implement that within your classrooms tomorrow. We're going to talk about terra nullius, we're going to talk about the notion of animacy, and we're going to talk about molecules and life, and how we define life. And what I hope is that can help build your classroom, because I think that all of us, when they wrote up call to action 62 and 63, which is directly dealing with your practice in classrooms, but also your training, they weren't just thinking about the ELA teacher. They certainly weren't thinking about the social studies teacher. They were actually thinking of you. They were thinking of the ways in which we can all do good, strong, thorough educational practice together in order for us to benefit all children. Because I'm not actually that interested in Indigenous children. We're often getting these things within our spaces, although it would be nice if we could incorporate those things in schools. But if there's any evidence now, we have 7,000 Indigenous peoples in universities, right now, University of Manitoba, Winnipeg. Perhaps it is our non-Indigenous relatives that need the most amount of attention this time to understand that Indigenous peoples have constructed them, given them incredible gifts, and yes, have a lot to say about the territories in which we live. Because science, I was in a meeting one time with one of my colleagues in the University of Manitoba, and he said, we're doing these cluster hires, meaning it's a terrible name to describe it, but we're doing like these multiple hires of professors across the university. And so I was at the natural science department, which of course is the study of the world and ecology and water. And they said, Niigaan, go find somebody else to get that professor job. We don't really need them here in natural sciences. And I said, no, you guys need them because for a whole bunch of reasons. And he says, well, at Niigaan, there's no such thing as Indigenous science. There's just science is science. And I went, wow, do we think science isn't culturally loaded? I think if there's anything that science has proven, it is all about culture, and it's all about politics and perspective. Science is based in perspective. Like, there used to be this perspective that Europeans had bigger brains, therefore they're smarter than everybody. And then we had this other idea that said, Darwinian evolution meant that certain peoples of the world evolved at certain points, therefore they're better, they have more civilized behavior, more morality, more responsibility. Therefore, coincidentally, all those people come from Europe, and it's just kind of a fluke that happened. It's science. And I'm like, that's not true. And science has proven, if anything, that truths constantly move. In fact, it may just be that truth may be something that has multiplicity parts to it. It has more perspective, not less. There is not a singular, but perhaps multiple views of truth. Now, there are many different stereotypes about Indigenous knowledge, and I only can spend a slide and a half with this. But what I would say is that if you go to any area in which we talk about Indigenous anything, it's often personified as infantile, inferior, deficient, dying. Indigenous things are always in what we refer to as kind of a lesser than model. Since basically 1492, contact, there's been this long history of march towards disappearance. Well, I'm here to tell you, none of that is true. Because if we look across and we see stuff I'll be talking about in just a minute, Indigenous science, Indigenous perspectives, culture, aesthetics, intellectual contributions, they're probably as vibrant as they ever have been, as authentic as they ever have been. But do we have challenges put into place since the time of the settlement of territories or colonization of North America? Absolutely. We have challenges in terms of acquiring our language, aspects of understanding our history, and there's been this long, brutal, genocidal approach to Indigenous peoples, which has always viewed them as inferior, whereas everybody else, particularly British and French, the Women-Jigojawak and the Jagana-Shok, have been viewed as superior, the controllers, while we have been the controlled. And whether that be in the reserve system, the Indian Act, so on and so forth. But modern day knowledge recognition or representation or knowledge spaces are those spaces in which we often see Indigenous knowledge as classified as lesser than. What it might look like in a textbook, for example, is like there's social studies, first 4 pages, Indigenous peoples, maybe throwing a spear or two, maybe coming across some land bridge, and then boom, Europeans show up and it's 450 pages. And then Indigenous peoples get like a page or two here and there, usually because we fought the train or we agreed to the train, meaning we're either savages or we are somehow civilized. And that's generally Canada's history. Now these days, you might think, okay, well, textbooks have changed. Maybe. We got maybe 15 pages now, but we got a much longer way to go. And what I'm here to tell you is that the scientific community has some similar tendencies as everyone else. Meaning that indigeneity is often deemed as lesser than or not at the same scope of, or seen as spiritual or superstitious at the very worst of it. You see the 19th century, the way it's recorded. Our traditions are labeled as infantile or something to do with demonic or evil. Nowadays, it might be thought of as, oh, that's just literature. These things are constructed perspectives which have been foisted upon us. And while we may not have come up with them, we all inherit them. And what that means is we also inherit this kind of weird tendency to binarize Indigenous science and what we might refer to as Western science. Like we might go, well, Western science has writing and Indigenous knowledge has oral. We now know by just the first 10 minutes of my presentation that that's not true either. There is no binaries. There is only ways in which context creates circumstances, and it's about understanding the ways that we define things, not the ways that we define things as not then things. Meaning that if we let knowledge stand on its own merits, we realize quickly that this whole idea of Indigenous this and Western this quickly falls apart. So we could go, oh, science, Western science is linear and Indigenous science is cyclical. That's a constructed notion too. Because we also have linearness within our traditions, and Western science also has cycles, notions of cycles. So what we need to do is come up with better definitions. We need to define Indigenous education as being something about teaching fundamentally who we are, which we've done for millennia. Now, Indigenous education was fundamentally about 4 questions, saying who we are, where we come from, why are we here, where are we going? Now, that's just a good physics classroom, isn't it? Isn't that just a good chemistry classroom? Isn't that just a good social studies or phys ed or ELA? Like Indigenous education had all of our subjects. We just used the lodge, not a school. We had the lodge, it was our school. And we had parts in which there were levels, we had degrees, we had representations, we had recognition of certain achievements of knowledge. We had ways in which we would mentor our young men, for example. They would go from being young men to being men with our community, or young women, and they would become women in our communities. And those were often initiation ceremonies that all centered around knowledge. But yet, While we may have recognized Indigenous education today, we still have an absence of Indigenous education throughout the system to be able to identify to particularly non-Indigenous peoples that this also teaches you. It teaches you that you have fundamental ties with Indigenous peoples, you have been created by Indigenous peoples, you sit on a bus beside them, you are married to them, you live in societies with them, we are the fastest growing population. Working with Indigenous peoples is the most employable skill today. There's no skill that's more important, because at this point, the thing that we have denied the most, the ways that we have not done the greatest job doing in schools particularly, but society in a larger way, we have not answered the 4 questions involving Indigenous peoples. So we have failed Indigenous children because we've created a sense of atrophy to tell them something that they're not, that they are something that they're not. But then we've also told non-Indigenous peoples that they don't have any relationship with Indigenous people. So guess what happens? Somebody says to me, I don't know any Indigenous peoples, this has nothing to do with me. I'm like, this has everything to do with you. Look at your driver's license. This has everything to do with you. And not only that, but look at the land that you stand on. Look at the air that you breathe. That's why when we go to the airport and we welcome Syrians in for the very first time, what we are saying is you are a part of things. What we did back in the day is we wrote them on treaties. We put clan signatures on treaties saying you are a part of something. In the same way that we said, bring tobacco to the party, because the tobacco will open up the gift of our relationship so that you can understand the world in which you're a part. If we don't trade tobacco, that conversation is never happening, and those who have come here are completely lost. I'm concerned most about non-Indigenous peoples and how lost they are in this space, because they have failed to be able to create this relationship, to understand that the land that they are on comes from the models that have been here for thousands and thousands of years. Now, the Canadian Council of Learning have come up with models to be able to articulate that, and I want you just to look at how scientific they are. Like, look at how Indigenous knowledge systems are all based in nature. They're all based in relationship. They're based in gifts. They're based in earth. They're based in stone. They're based in trees. Like, if I were to tell you what is the biggest metaphor in Indigenous education for Anishinaabe peoples, I would say a tree. Because our trees are what represent ourselves, or our Gikindasawin, which is what we say our knowledge is. So our trees are the metaphor for our knowledge, meaning I can stand, if there's a tree right there, I can look at the tree, and then I can say, well, there's never a point in my life I understand all the tree, and right now I can see part of it, but I want to come over to my sister over here, and she'll tell me a little bit about the tree. And maybe then I go to my sister over here, my brother over here, they tell me a little bit more about the tree. There's 2 things that we realize about the tree, if we use that as the metaphor. First is, there's never a time in your life you're going to know all the tree. You're always going to learn more. It's called holistic learning or forever learning, meaning you never stop learning. There are many people who can teach you about the tree, and they're not always people with PhD degrees. There's people who have knowledge from all different walks of life that can teach you about the tree. Meaning you're always going to keep learning. Second, you're never going to know it all. So there's this like premise that we have in Anishinaabe called the Manadok. And what it means is the mystery or the essence. And what it means is that the essence is in all things, or the mystery is in all things. Meaning there's at a point where we realize there is things that we will never know. And that's okay. Like, we should keep learning, but at some point we go, life is just mysterious. Like, that's interesting. That's what makes life interesting. And science has created this catch-all category called dark matter. That's just mystery. And we've had it for millennia. We came up with dark matter. Like, that's our thing. And we did it by looking at trees. You know, some people did it by looking at the skies. We did it by looking at trees. You know, and whether it be tobacco or whether it be our lodges or wild rice picking, you know, all of these things are inherently scientific. And I don't have time to go through everything. But I'm privileged enough to work with many district school boards down here, divisions in Manitoba, Saskatchewan. I just came from Alberta yesterday. And you know, like, what I say is the best metaphor to be able to understand how to build an Indigenous education institution is to look at the way that we build our lodges. So tonight I'm giving a talk at, what is it called?
University of Ontario Institute of Technology.
Okay, whatever. UOIIT or something. Okay, I'm giving that talk then. And my talk tonight is how to build an Indigenous university. What I'm really going to tell you about is how to build a lodge. And what that means is, number one rule with the lodge, you must put your hands on the lodge to learn in it. Meaning you have to participate in the building of the lodge. You have to cut the trees, you have to set the earth, meaning you have to set the earth, lay the tobacco on the earth, you have to set the ground, and then you have to tie the ferns. Everybody has to take a role within the role of building the classroom. That is just good educational practice. Like, what have I just said in all of that that doesn't fit in your classroom? And all of that comes from Indigenous traditions. Now, as I've already talked a little bit about knowledge and representation and recognition of knowledge, but we do a really good job with this and understanding, saying this is the place in which knowledge resides, this is where evidence is, this is the place where our hypotheses are published and therefore are proven to be somewhat true or lesser than true. But Anishinaabeg have been publishing in this place. We have interacted with this place. We've experimented in this place. And we are constantly now learning from this place about things like dark matter or the Manaduk. And we are doing it today. And we're continuing to publish, continuing to talk about it. We lay our tobacco every morning at the sunrise ceremony. We do a territorial acknowledgement where we say, this is what it means to be in a relationship in this space. This is what it means to have two beings that constantly move, this is my little thing about the molecules, and have them come together. And that's what relationship's all about. In other words, that is for family. And you know, our institutions may look like this, but we are pedagogically speaking of this. This is where the YouTube video may not be so useful. I don't know, because I'm saying a lot of this to that. But you know, Indigenous education is inherently about a system of and. That's way too simple, but it's the best I can do for today, is to say that we constantly are thinking about how we can learn more, and we can learn more from the world around us. And you know, because we don't just learn from human beings, we learn actually 99% of our life from non-human beings. We learn how to live from the water, from our clan relatives, our animal, fish, and bird relatives, and from the skies, which are constantly moving as well, and are alive beings that share with us teachings and knowledge that are constantly giving us gifts. Like, we witnessed tobacco this morning. The only way that I can explain to you why we do tobacco is by saying it's not really a spiritual thing, or a religious thing, sorry, it's a spiritual thing. And what I mean by that, it's like the spirit of laughter. Like, you never not have it. Like, people go, oh, what, you know, like, Indigenous culture is religious. No, it isn't. It's spiritual. Meaning that it's like you never stop doing it. It's like putting your foot in a thing of water. You're not only surrounded by it, but then you are also water itself. So our understanding of spirituality, which is that we are literally the spirit. And what that means is that we are moving with the spirit. There's no God in the heavens. There is only the essence itself, which we are a part of. Therefore, every step we take is a sacred step, because everything that we do has a relationship with the world around us. When we build tobacco, we're in a learning process, and we go, okay, all right, let's grow tobacco. Tobacco is very hard to grow, very difficult to grow, takes a great amount of time and energy. If you're lucky, though, if you have a green thumb, as they say, if you have the ability to commit to tobacco, meaning you spend your time not watching Netflix on a Friday, but you go home from work and you care for tobacco, you water it, you get enough heat. My brother-in-law has to put a heating lamp on it. You make sure that you take care of the tobacco. Maybe you will earn a plant, maybe. You don't actually grow tobacco, you earn it. And then you crinkle it, and then eventually you get this tiny little pinch. And the hundreds of hours that you put into that gift, you give it away. What an incredible gift that you give. Like, if you put 100 hours into something and you gave it to somebody, what respect do you have for that person? And what is that you have earned in all of your relationships with creation that you've now offered to another being? What a gift. And all that you ask is that gift be returned, which is the word miigwech, which means I will return, or I will gift something. Miigwech means, miigwe is the verb, means I give. You know, the teaching of tobacco is that we can earn our relationships with each other. And that, what I hope, my relatives, is helps you redefine science. When we redefine science, we look to the ways in which Indigenous peoples have interacted with the world and understood that there are specific sacred and intellectual traditions within Indigenous cultures that are often not deemed as scientific, but are very scientific. And they come up with notions, you have to just figure out the definitions in your areas, whether they be hypothesis, whether they be experiments, whether they be truth. Indigenous science is very much a real area, and it is an area that continues to evolve and change and grow today. It's not something that died in the 17th century. It is something that is very present and is here today. And here are 4 ways Indigenous science has changed the world. We do this little thing called Thanksgiving. right? Now, what is it that we eat at Thanksgiving? Almost exclusively indigenous things. Beans, squash, pumpkin. Oh, by the way, you know why we had turkeys? We had this little process, in our communities, and I say our communities as if I was Mohican people. I'm talking about people way off in the east there. These things, turkeys, that would follow our communities. If we just left a little bit of scraps of food, they would follow us. They were the first fast food. Because when we were invited to the party with the newcomers, we brought turkey, the most accessible food that we had that fed the most amount of people. Turkeys followed our lives. And we learned that by watching them, by offering them gifts, by experimenting, by creating relationships. And food, all the foods and medicines that we see around us have groundings within indigenous knowledge. Not the ones, of course, that we now think of in little pill bottles, but even those too. Companies like Bayer have turned to indigenous communities and said, what is it that you know about the land? Oh, it turns out you have certain practices. Uncle Ben's has learned from indigenous peoples involving wild rice and have commodified those knowledge, often exploited it. And as well as medicinal companies have looked to the ways that indigenous peoples have understood the chemistry of medicines. For example, smudging, sage is an antibacterial agent for the air. We weren't meant to smoke 42 times a day like cigarettes, but tobacco is a calming agent, and we were meant to do it once a week, maybe twice a week. And those things actually produced health. They didn't take it away. So when I tell young people, I say tobacco is not about cancer. That's what you think about it now. And I'm not telling anybody to go smoke. I'm saying tobacco can teach you everything you need to know about life, not death. And you do it by watching the way it grows. Technology, how many ways that we have given technology that understand gravity and weight and balance, all the great things that I learned in physics when I was in high school. Technology like snowshoes or kayaks or things that are produced today to be able to build lodges today. When we build lodges today, one of the rules that we have is we don't use metal. That makes you be very innovative with the world around you, involving technology and how to bend tamarack, how to tie tamarack, how to cut it down, how to do that work. And we also do that in the building of our relationships today. We innovate all the time. Like we have practices involving technology constantly, but we still yet find that certain technology maintain their integrity over time. Like we still have yet to ever find a better way to commit to the earth than growing tobacco, than offering tobacco. There's just not a better way. It's like there's no technology that does a better job. Ecology, now scientists are looking to indigenous peoples to understand climate change. Probably the most sacred and important knowledge that to understand the land around us is by indigenous peoples. So by the reduction of seals, the feeding of polar bears, the fish within Lake Winnipeg involving relationships with algae, which I'll speak to in a moment. All of this knowledge is carried by indigenous peoples within our songs, within our ceremonies, within our lodges and our teachings. All of that is now teaching scientists in scientific journals. Astronomy and physics is yet another way in which we can understand that. Now, I don't really have time to you want me to end right at 10? What do you want to do? Okay, all right. Well, it'll just be another 3 minutes then, because this video is 3 minutes, so. Oops, sorry.
So this story concerns the asterism known as the Big Dipper. For a lot of First Nations people, this story represents various animals. And the foremost among them is the big bear, and then the Cree language is called Mishtamasqua. The legend talks about what the wages of being a bully are, and how even the littlest of animals can bring down the most ferocious. The way the story goes is that long ago there was a big bear which roamed the country, and this bear was the hugest, of course, biggest, the meanest, and therefore it did what it wanted to do. It preyed on everybody, every spiritual being on the face of earth. And this went on for years and years. The bear stole winter supplies, ripped up camps, killed spiritual beings, killed the animals, killed humans. And so one day, all these beings had a big meeting, and they decided that they were tired of being afraid of this bear. And so it was decided that the bear would have to go. 7 hunters were chosen, 7 of the best trackers, and 7 of the best shots. Small birds were sent to do away with this bear. They went hunting for the bear, but the bear was forewarned by raven and crow that there were hunters after him. And so the bear, upon hearing that he was being hunted, took off, and the birds chased him. And the way the others say is that the chase was on, and it went around the world 4 times. It circled the globe. And on the 4th time, they were going so fast that they came up over the horizon, and they flew into the air. This happened to be just around September, October. And as they flew into the air, the bear saw that the hunters were gaining on him, and he was getting tired, so he turned and faced his attackers, his hunters. And just as he did that, one of the lead birds got a shot more than wounded that bear. So that bear was bleeding profusely as he stood and faced his hunters. And he shook, just like a dog shake when it's wet. And as he shook, all the blood was being felt in the earth and landed on all the broadleaf plants. So that's why I elders say that in, around September, October, all the leaves change color because of the blood of that bear. They also go on to say that when that bear shook, a droplet of blood hit that lead bird, the one that shot the bear right in the chest, and today he has a red breast. And for the Cree people, they call that bird pee-pee tail, the robin. That's why the robin today has a red breast. And so they got rid of that bear to forever warn everybody about the wages of being a bully, about using your power. The big bear was put in the sky, and also to honor those 7 birds. They placed those birds in the sky, right in front of that big bear. That new bird, pee-pee tail, is the brightest star in that constellation. That pee-pee tail, the robin, was also given a special egg, and that egg represented the color of the sky. And on that egg, there were speckles to represent the tablets, the stars. And that's why our elders always warn the children never to harm the robin, because it's a special bird. It's a creator's bird. And that is the legend of Mr. Muska, the big bear.
One thing I really love about this story is it does the job of explaining the connections between a whole set of different beings in creation and how they are what we refer to as the very beginning, Enowenduin or Indenuaimagadaduk, which they are related things. And most principles talk about how we are created within a whole host of beings in different spaces, all culminating in moments and places and times in which we have an opportunity to do something about it, to understand it, and then act. This happened in my family a number of years ago, involving Lake Winnipeg. Now, Lake Winnipeg has been involved with my family for a very long period of time. What I tell people is I'm the most Manitoban of Manitobans, meaning there's nothing more Manitoban than my family. On my dad's side, we are French and Anishinaabe, we are Cree and Anishinaabe. On my mom's side, we are French and British. And Lake Winnipeg has really been the thing that has brought my family together. Winnipeg is not named for the city. Winnipeg is referring to the lake, which is our great auntie, our great grandmother. And we have been telling stories as Indigenous peoples of Manitoba about Lake Winnipeg for millennia. And we have written those things on rock faces. We have done those things in now we've referred to as squiggly lines on the page or books. And we have been telling those things in what we would refer to as the first library of our territory, meaning that we wrote these things on petriforms, on rock faces, in sand, on the rocks themselves, in an entire library of archive that goes throughout the northern Great Lakes, all the way up to Norway House. This story tells the story about travels on Lake Winnipeg, and it is situated in Norway House. I'll show you quickly where that is. That's Norway House is right here, and I grew up in this place right here. This is the story of people who transport from their family in Norway House down to Selkirk. Another name for that is called my family. That is the epitome of my family who came down from Norway House and settled in that area. But that word Winnipeg refers to clouded or muddy or dirty waters. And you'll have to hear people refer to Winnipeg as this place of dirty waters. But Winnipeg is referring to the lake, not the city. And so what Winnipeg does is it really is the epitome of this entirety of this space. And we have studied Winnipeg for millennia. But Winnipeg doesn't just come randomly. It comes from the melting of a glacier, which created Lake Agassiz. Lake Winnipeg eventually drained away into the Hudson Bay, carving out the landscape and creating what's called the Lake Winnipeg watershed, meaning everything that is in that watershed flows into Lake Winnipeg in an incredible funnel and then flows out along the Nelson River, right here, into Hudson Bay. But two things have happened. One is we have polluted like crazy the Lake Winnipeg watershed. Pig fertilizer, shampoo in our hair, and there's a little thing in the northern Alberta right here on this watershed, which is called the oil sands of Alberta. Everything flows into Lake Winnipeg. And by the way, we have Manitoba Hydro, which has dammed up the entire north, meaning you can't get the water out of here. It sits in an incredible pool of algae. Now, Winnipeg, the clouded water, refers to the algae, or what we refer to as the attigib. And it turns out that when there are things in the earth, it produces too much attigib, algae. And we as Anishinaabe and the Nehewak relations, our Cree relatives, noticed this for millennia. And we studied it, and we created intellectual theories around it, what we refer to as the Mamajisak, the Enowendowin, Wawayak, and the Bagajanun. The algae is the Bagajanun, the gift of when things come together. Enowendowin is how things are related. Wawayak is everything has a place. And that Mamajisak, which is our songs, is how we publish that knowledge. It's how we share that knowledge. It's our first peer-reviewed journal. Because Anishinaabe science is the epitome of we studied the gigot, the fish, we studied the bears, makwa, we studied the nebe, the water, and we studied the attigib. And what we realized is that when the attigib was overproduced, it was when these things had forgotten their relationship with this thing. And whether that be too much fertilizer on the soil or whether it be the oil sands of today, we continue to develop that scientific theory, and we are yet to be wrong. Lake Winnipeg is the most threatened lake in North America. Somehow we've eclipsed the Great Lakes as being the sickest lake in North America. And so therefore, we have forgotten our relationships to each other, and the fish are exponentially dying or hiding in certain pockets of Lake Winnipeg. There is too much algae to the point where the water is choking the life out of all of their vegetation. And that is affecting the bears, who now have nothing to eat and now are generally dying. And we are in Manitoba becoming to the point where they're now going into towns because they can't be fed by the waterways. What does that mean? That means the reduction of bear populations and the very nature of Anishinaabe, where we ask the question, how can we have bear clan people if there's no bears? Now, we have to do something about it, and my family did. My mother decided to go on a walk. She had a vision and a dream that our auntie needed help. And that what she did with my two sisters is she walked 1,400 kilometers around Lake Winnipeg, like many of our Anishinaabe relatives or aunties. Joseph Mandamin is probably the best known for having traveled all around the Great Lakes and lakes throughout the world. But my mother did this work with my sisters, and they walked 1,400 kilometers. They were also joined by a little girl who was 8, 9 years old at the time. She also walked a few kilometers, and she brought this guy with her. And this is the kind of work that she did, because she said, Daddy, you can't, her name means Namiji Nibikwe, which means the light that dances off the water. And when she received her name, referring to the way that the light refracts off the water, her name is literally science itself. But she says to me, Daddy, we have to go on this walk because you can't see the light dancing off the water when there's too much algae in it. She's not marching because she's anti-economy, and she's not even anti-oil sands, although I think she has some concerns about that. She is marching, she is walking, she is carrying a small vessel of Lake Winnipeg to help her auntie because it is fundamentally who she is. She's not anti-anything. If anything, she is about life. And Indigenous peoples, we have been talking about the power of Lake Winnipeg in our texts for a very long period of time. In 1806, someone said to a guy called Che Pewiti, he said, how do you get home? We're at Split Lake. How do you get home to Cumberland House or the Paw? Here's Split Lake right here. And what he wrote is he drew this incredible map where he says, this is the way that I travel home. You can go this way, you can go that way, or you can go this way. And maybe you might even go to Lake Winnipeg, which is this line right here. Now, what was he drawing? He's drawing the original internet of Manitoba, the rivers, where you found knowledge and you also shared relationships with peoples, because what he also wrote on the map were all the peoples he would meet along the way. Whose family was married to whose family? Whose brother liked which sister? Which family traded or had a war with this other family? Because in this complexity, this is the story of Manitoba, and it was built by the ecology. And that's why we named our places after the ecology. Why we named our places after the way the water fell, after the way the wind sounded. That's why Manitowabo means two things. It means the life that comes off the water. It also means the life that's been placed on the earth. Manitowapi. Nothing more Indigenous, remember the tree, than two names for the same thing. There are multiple ways to see the tree. Now, when I do consultations with people like Manitoba Hydro, and they say, well, here, we're going to build this generating station right here called the Kias Generating Station. But we've got a problem in that we have to consult, we have to talk to Indigenous peoples and talk to them about how they will be impacted by this dam. And they say, well, you know, these are the people that we need to talk to. The little orange circles are the First Nations we need to talk to. I'm like, you got to talk to more than that. And probably the most important thing of all is that we can learn from Indigenous senses of ecology, which is in written text, even in the squiggly lines in that library, that we can understand that Indigenous peoples understood the sacred ecology and relationships that are within this land, and we have become a part of them. And we might be able to teach Manitoba Hydro a thing or two about how to live in this space, how to make relationships, and how not to damage things like our ante to hurt life. And that may just be, in this time of division and this time of where I look to our friends to the south and I see more anger and more hurt, and I see more names being tossed across the table, I think, at what point will we stop? At what point will we look to each other and say we are all in this thing together? At what point will we say that we can learn from one another in a meaningful way and not in the exploitative way that we've done for 150 years? At what point can we do that? Because up in the north, we are not that much far off than our relatives in the south. And how is it that we can think of Indigenous peoples not as protesters, but as protectors? We're not anti-economy, we are anti-death, and that we may be able to share something about how to live in this place. And we will do that not for our own children, but we will do that for your children too. And that join with us in this great scientific inquiry of how to live in this place sustainably, meaningfully, and reciprocally. With that I say Niigaan, and thank you very much for giving me your time. Sorry. I have to turn the mic off first. Sorry, just speaking to my laptop.
Just stand beside her.
There you go, do that.
So awkward. Bonjour, I want to take this moment. It's a real honor and privilege to be able to say Niigaan to you, Niigaan. And I've heard you speak several times, and I truly can honestly say this has been my favorite talk. Maybe because part of my background is science. I have a real passion for, and I get really excited when Western science and ways of understanding and relating to the world blends in with Indigenous knowledge. And I also co-chair a provincial organization, First Nations Maintainment Education Association of Ontario. It's the longest title out there, I think. And our work is, a lot of our work is around elevating and highlighting and showcasing the sophistication and complex Indigenous societies that have and continue to exist here. And so I really want to echo some of the messaging that you brought to us today through the lens of science, because oftentimes when we say Indigenous education or Indigenous knowledge, it often gets associated with social studies or history. And so I think it's time now that we're bringing in these other areas of science and physics and mathematics, and also looking at giving to us all the time. And so it's a nice reminder that we have to stop and think about these things and what is our relationship to all of creation and how do we start giving back again? Because we've been taking and taking and taking to the point where who's taking this microphone now? What's happening next? Somebody want to say what's next? I think there's an agenda.
That was our first live stream of the day. Hope you enjoyed it. Keep tuned in to the Steo YouTube channel to check out 2 more presentations today, one at 11 a.m. and one at 2 p.m. And again on Friday and Saturday.
Well,